Hello again, my fellow emoluments. Today we're going to talk about units of measure in transacting land. Source materials for this presentation are as follows: Mason's Manual, Jefferson's Manual, Black's Law Dictionary, Merriam-Webster's Dictionary, and of course, American Jurisprudence. When you're going to be constructing a work product of any kind, here's a rule for you. This is the work product rule, which is the rule providing for qualified immunity of an attorney's work product from discovery or other compelled disclosure. Because remember, when you rise and report, you are compelled to disclose. The exemption was primarily established to protect an attorney's litigation strategy. But as we have seen things come up in recent history, we're going to utilize this to expose some of the shenanigans that have taken place while we were on the clock building cars, doing other things that we were doing. So here's the law. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8. This is to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and investors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So for things like Obamacare and some of the other violations of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, this was the predications that they used. Again, it's the predications from where we need to begin. We are claiming and exercising a federal right, and under Davis v. Wexler, the assertion of federal rights, when plainly and reasonably made, is not to be defeated under the name of local practice. So you can expect to get crap from bar members for doing this. Let them know that flat out of the box. You're a licensed professional. You do business in commerce, and you're going to expose any shenanigans you run across, because transactions between others can benefit but should not injure anyone who is not party to them. So, under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, Congress shall have the power. Congress has the power, which is why we report to them, to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and of course to, fix the standard of weights and measures. Measures is the primary source or the primary content of what we're discussing here. And having participated in the creation of multiple contracts, both in the private sector as well as provided goods and services in the public sector, the only lawful course of action as a licensed professional is full disclosure, as the terms and conditions of that licensing require. These mandatory disclosures consequently arise from the same case which provides remedy for these and this and other conflicts like them. Brady versus Maryland, 1963. So, terms and conditions. This is referred to the quid pro quo phase. What for what, right? Some of this stuff is going to be pretty in-depth. Let's just put it that way. Expect to do a lot of reading. Polish up your reading glasses because it's going to take you a while. This is an action or thing that is exchanged. When you start looking at these fake money transfer documents, things that are come to you by way of SAR reports, right? Those are usually going to come from banking or other financial institutions. There's referred to suspicious activity reports. So expect to get a ton of those. So as you proceed here, again, paying very close attention to the rules of diction, right? When in doubt, in favor of nature, I always say. So the diction arises from the dictum, right? So again, choose your words carefully. You can be guaranteed the actors who did what they did certainly chose their words carefully. So How you break it down is going to either make or break you as a success or a failure in your endeavor. So, reciprocity. Focus on definition number 2 here, because you're going to figure out that as you proceed, there was no mutual concession of advantages or privileges for purposes of commercial or diplomatic relations. Now, the reason I choose this particular definition is because diplomatic relations, jurisdiction number 1, that's defense, right? And then, of course, commerce, violations of the Commerce Clause, commercial, unlawful contracts. For example, domestic violence contracts. Tell your wife she was entered into a domestic violence contract and stand back. Just, I'm going to stop right there. You let you go from there. So, citing definition number 2 is mutual concession of advantages or privileges, being able to articulate from where that standing arises. Conflicts of interest became as clear as the summer morning. So, again, when you tell that information to your wife, duck. Now we figured out what emoluments of statutable plunder are, right, from the Annals of America, Volume 2. Having been through this myself personally, I can pretty much guarantee, I know what a wrap-up smear and all that garbage is. I don't need Pelosi to, or anybody else for that matter, to articulate that. Simple fact of the matter is, again, this was a word. It was selectively excluded from jurisprudence, so, of course, in the course of my duties, I paid it no mind. So, how ironic. One of the reasons it was excluded is because that just so happens to be the answer from the riddle in the Declaration of Independence. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, capital O, means it's a noun, thing, person, place, or thing, tangible or intangible. That would be those emoluments of government. Evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. This is why we don't have just the right, we have the fiduciary duty as licensed professionals. To do what? Throw off these foreign emoluments and be the guards for our future security. It's our job. So the fact that this dates back to the original Continental Congress is only just nothing more than a sense of historical irony from my perspective, and I'm sure from yours once you get going. Because as we know, the original Continental Congress was dominated by the merchants, which is why we incorporate. So let's get into the law of the land here and the transfer of real property transactions and how this stuff comes about. Now, here's what's actually been happening. Every time they convert from a unit of measure, this being the oldest I've been able to find, rods and morgens. So, which led into metes and bounds, which are going to be covered in just a few minutes. But one of the reasons they transition from units of measure is so they can keep inflating, right, the attainder that it takes to acquire the land, right? They're artificially adding something where it doesn't belong, short version. So the oldest I can find from the original 13 colonies, rods, right, property, a unit of land measurement equal to about 16.5 feet or 25 links, that's fencing, or 1/4 of a chain. This unit is sometimes found in old deeds. Historically, the measurement varied according to local usage, but was standardized by the 19th century, also termed pole, perch, rood, R-O-O-D, never seen it spelled that way until here. And of course, see link in a chain, right? There's your perch. So what is a morgen? M-O-R-G-E-N, right? Not A-N. So this is a Dutch and Southern African unit of land area equal to 2.116 acres. Well, we know There are 43,560 square feet in an acre. So this is why we go into the transition where we transition from the language of the living, rods and where we actually went into implementation of the language of the dead. So if you see the correlation here, how ironic these two terms in Merriam-Webster's are literally one right after the other. Talk about telling on yourself. The morgue, right? A place where the body of a dead person's are kept temporarily pending identification or release for burial or autopsy. A collection of reference works and files of reference material in a newspaper or news periodical office. The second definition, I bet you did not know. So the fact that we can now literally figure out that the measuring land in morgens, right? We now know where the origins of morgue in 1821 came from, right? So I said this is going to be a very interesting presentation for you, because this is a lot of history you probably didn't even know. So starting from rods and morgens, okay, this was the original units of measure, right? When the original settlers would stake their claim, hence even why surveyors today even have to use those stakes. So I'll be asking you, hey, where's the pins? You know where the pins are? And the survey folks will have to use their metal detectors and various other pieces of equipment to locate those. So, but anyway, in so much as a morgue, right, you perceive it as a place where dead people are kept, right? So, as we now know, that's not true. That's the diction of the dead. So, we obviously, proceeding from the simple fractions resolution method using lowest common denominator principles. Latin, of course, is the language of the dead, diction of the dead, right? Hence, it's a dead language. So this is how they've been able to pull these shenanigans, literally speaking a foreign dead language. So now that we can clearly articulate that, we know exactly what we're doing and how we're going to unscrew it. So let's look at the interest analysis technique. I use this every single day in my previous life, as I'm fond of calling it. This is the science behind the law, right? We know that law is an acronym, stands for land, air, and water. So the people's emoluments, if we're going to examine these things and we want to make sure that domestic tranquility, as it's articulated in the preamble, are ultimately achieved, or at least as close to achievement as we can possibly get. Some of the science that we might use, to do that, I like mathematics myself. As you see here, emoluments equals under tick, emoluments equals the quantity of P plus G divided by A, right? Factoring out advantage, right? While adding profit and gain together. So to see and examine out of context, if I were going to look at this through an oscilloscope, for example, the representation right above it would be what that would look like. So the math, obviously, in the upper right-hand corner of that diagram, or in that picture, of course, utilizing basic mathematical principles, 9 principles. Square root of 9 is 3. Rule of threes. Can't screw up the rule of threes. Tic-tac-toe. So when looking at specific advantages, right, I've classified advantage as judicial canon law, integrity of process, where's the start, where's the middle, where's the end, and of course unauthorized practice of law as articulated in the Florida statute. Fiduciary, your relationship to the contract known as the Constitution. Declaration of Independence. We can go back to Magna Carta if we want to, just for the sport of it. So, but either way, what's the fact pattern? Follow the money. What's the fact pattern? Was treason present? Did it lead to treason? Right? So, and of course, the gains, those ill-gotten gains, those sets of men, right, as articulated in Texas law. No man, family, or set of men is entitled to any separate public emoluments, blah, blah, blah. Article 1, Section 26, I believe. The exclusionary rule. Sorry for my terrible handwriting. This is me on the whiteboard. And of course, the ninth principle under gains I chose was hearsay, because I kept hearing so much about, oh, that's hearsay, that's hearsay. So of course, it had to work its way in there somewhere. So set of man, exclusionary rule, and hearsay. Those are your final three under the category of gains as I articulated them. Your analysis may be completely different. This was just, one version of an interest analysis technique I wrote out on the whiteboard. And I would certainly hope this would be a practice that you would employ as well, because unlike on a computer screen, it's just easier to erase a whiteboard and change something and, course correct as things become necessary to do that. So this slide, remember, from markets, supreme law of the land, or up, minimum standard of due process, or down. So there's your margin. Don't color outside the lines, right? Quid pro quo, what for what, reciprocity, the returns on the investments. So for example, we know there are 43,560 square feet in an acre, right? So this unit of measure was most widely used post-Reconstruction due to the implementation of the postal roads diagram below. So there's the context of postal roads. You'll hear this referred to in Roman law because the Romans were typically known as the road makers. So there's your most often correlated historical reference. We're going to get into metes and bounds. Is pretty much what we're talking about. So Merriam-Webster's Common Observance Dictionary. Here's your definition of metes, right? There's basically two. The second one, of course, boundaries, bound. So, but the first definition, right, refers to as, number one, as an archaic measure, hence the language of the dead. Dog Latin. You'll get to know it. To give out by measure, or dole, right? Dole out, is of course, again, it's just slang most often. So I refer to this usually as where a particular plat of land meets the postal road. So, and of course, the boundaries of that plat, that's why I was just talking about a few minutes ago. It's staked, right? So, to transact these plats, right, staked out areas of real property, to know a thing and to be bound to know it are regarded in law as equivalent. So these are those government markets outside the scope of the Constitution. But you notice that they are shipping lanes. These are extra lanes added. You see this stuff on the freeway a lot. How ironic. That's the reason I chose this representation. So these actors act outside the normal quid pro quo, what for what, and reciprocity and return on your investments. Here's why. These government monopoly markets with little to no reciprocity, all managed by foreign emoluments, meaning foreign pillars, right, working from pillars of law, violating Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 of the Constitution's Foreign Emoluments Clause, excuse me, and consequently the language of the proper 13th Amendment, where it specifically dictates foreign power, foreign pillars of law. So those of you who've been following comprehend that law, governments, and hierarchies, pillars are the base pair element, right? It's basic parts. So in order bound, right? Are you bound to your oath of office? You most certainly are. Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2 and 3. So, as I showed earlier. So, but basically, in so much as bounds, boundary, right? Starting at the bottom, something that indicates or fixes a limit or extent. Okay. The other thing is, the others are something that, number 2, something that limits or restrains. And of course, borderline. Again, language of the dead. Always look for the dog Latin. This is these actors telling on themselves, whether they realize it or not. They're acting in the language of the dead. Anytime you see anything in dog Latin, all caps, that should raise a red flag to you. Obliged, duty bound, right? Confined, desk bound. Huh, yeah. How much Chinese overtime did you put in through the course of your career? I can name a few years. This one cracked me up. If I laughed so hard, I almost couldn't breathe. Mind resolved, right? And, the action of rebounding, a bounce. So, that's why I say there's a whole looking at meets and bounds as units of measure. You can pretty much go down through and be able to articulate what has transpired between that and the lot and block mechanism. What a nightmare that turned into. So, as we go back into the language of the dead, now we know where mortgage comes from. Morgue, mortuary, mortgage. See where I'm going with this? This is a conveyance of title to property that is given as security for the payment of a debt or the performance of a duty. And that will become void upon payment or performance according to the stipulated terms of the contract, basically. A lien against property that is granted to secure an obligation, such as a debt, and that is extinguished upon mortgage term, along with a financial payment of principal at the end of the term, also referred to as amortized mortgage, amortized payment schedule, but you'll hear it referred to as. How much of this is fraud? Oh, don't get me started. Financial transactions is going to be each according to that particular plat. So for the here and the now, get used to referring to real property in its proper name, which is a plat. So, but where they tie in these mortgages, right? Now that we've transitioned into this lot and block system, right? The mortgages, the quote unquote attainder, only increases with each conversion of rods and morgans, meets and bounds. Now we're into lots and blocks. See the pattern forming here? Escalation. So I said these are these same actors, these same foreign emoluments and, fake bankers utilizing fake things they call debt notes. -1 times -1. Debt note cancels a debt. Are you kidding me? You think we didn't see, I wouldn't see right through that. Hello. So, mortgage banker, mortgage clause, right? This is why I say this is why the language in the Constitution specifically states no bills of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligations of a contract, because as it says specifically in the definition, the contract is discharged, right, upon the performance of the contract, the stipulations and the terms and conditions stipulated in the contract. So, also termed a dead pledge. Seriously. So, this is the terminology, right? The only reason I'm putting it in here is because, again, it's the language of the dead. The process, right? How far back are we going? We're in lots and blocks right now, which is all fraud. We know that. It's Sharia law. The meets and bounds and rods and Morgans. So, you know, this is one of the reasons why when we rise and report to the legislature, we're going to have to work this out and make that decision by a vote. So, I mean, it is what it is. So the only thing you can do is provide the best, most detailed, comprehensive work product that you can supply based on any transaction, occurrence, or event, but specifically with as these things relate to the transfers of real property, subject to licensing oversight, right? That's part of your job, right? Zombie mortgage. Slang, a mortgage that has been paid in full but remains active because there's no record it was paid off. Well, imagine that. It's also termed reincarnated mortgage. This is, yeah. Those of you who have seen this South Park episode, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and probably why you're laughing hysterically. Anyway, going to get into the verbal act doctrine. This is why I'm telling you to, you know, some of this stuff you're going to rise and report on. Most of it, I'd like to hopefully resolve, right? Provide resolution and discharge these fake debts through the legislative House of Representatives, right? And do away with this shenanigans. But we're going to see what happens. So, I would construct a cover page to go with each of your documents. That would be your talking points, because you're only going to have about 5 minutes. Unless, of course, they want to call you into special session, right? To testify based on what you found. So each transaction, be prepared. Prepare your reports as if you are going to testify and spend the day, pack a lunch. So there's a method behind that madness, and the method is, number one, your work products will always be consistent. That's the first reason. And the second reason is, if you have to go back and review one 4.5 years later, right? When you read back through it, you'll be, oh, that's right. So the more detailed you can be in your construction, actually, the less likely you are to have to rise and report. But don't think some bar member's not going to try it. So we already know that's who they are. I covered this under the torts presentation. I just brought it up again because what we're talking about, discharging any specific shenanigans, right, that took place in these fake courts. These courts don't exist. These are bank transactions. This person is a hearing officer disguised as a judge. If I were in the third pillar right now, I'd be a little more than slightly miffed. So don't be surprised if you see a judge want to throw the bench at somebody. That's why I said right now is not the time that you want to piss off the third pillar. So be very, very careful as you report. Your investigation, right? Investigations are at all times a legitimate function of the legislature. Why? Because what you're overseeing is institutions of the state, right? Departments of the state government. You've assumed or been delegated supervisory control, right? To correct these erroneous rulings right? And you're going to utilize every bit of your knowledge to do that. So your discharge, again, from I posted this back here from the torts because I want you guys to get familiar with this, right? This is basically the language of a discharge, right? The allegation of unconstitutionality, right? Grant of special privileges or immunities, but notice that the word in the book, what word is missing there? It's highlighted in red, right? You see what I'm saying? What emolument? What color of law? What configuration of emoluments are we talking about? Because in a republic, all I know is advantage, profit, and gain, articulated by and overseen in the private sector as market, margin, and capital. So again, thank you for watching. I hope you found this content helpful, even if only for review purposes. So at the end of this PowerPoint, there are some bonus slides for review. I'm not going to cover them, but it's good. It's good information. It'll be in the PowerPoint and, of course, in the PDF for review as well. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the show.